The day started like any other, routine, predictable, unremarkable. Claire rushed out the door with a flurry of excuses about back-to-back meetings and deadlines. She barely glanced in my direction as she snatched her bag from the counter, muttering something about being late. I didn't even get my usual half-hearted kiss on the cheek. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. Claire had been distant lately. Sure, but everyone has their moments. Work, life, stress, it adds up. At least, that's what I told myself every time she brushed me off. But today, something was different. She'd left her spare set of keys on the counter. Claire never forgets her keys. It wasn't just that. When I picked them up, I noticed something odd. Attached to the ring was a small electronic key fob I didn't recognize. It wasn't for our house, car, or the office building where she worked. It was sleek, unfamiliar. A quiet anomaly in a life I thought I knew inside and out. Curiosity whispered louder than caution. Instead of calling her to let her know, I slid the keys into my pocket. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. As the morning dragged on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling. I decided to test the fob against the places I knew she frequented. The gym? Nope. Her office? Wrong again. The sense of unease grew heavier with every failed attempt. Then it hit me, the building on Elm Street. It was just a few blocks away. An upscale apartment complex with gated parking. I'd driven past it countless times but never paid much attention. Why would I? We didn't know anyone who lived there. Or so I thought. The fob worked. I walked through the glass doors, trying to act like I belonged. A concierge gave me a polite nod, and I forced a casual smile, my pulse hammering in my chest. The elevator hummed softly as it carried me to the 8th floor. Apartment 804. The door wasn't locked. I froze, hand hovering over the handle, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when I was this close to the truth. I pushed it open, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, the air smelled faintly of vanilla and something else I couldn't place. Something intimate. Shoes were neatly lined by the door, none of which belonged to Claire. A jacket hung on the back of a chair, too large to be hers. The place was spotless, minimalistic, and cold. But on the coffee table sat a framed photo of Claire with a man I didn't recognize. They looked close. His arm was wrapped around her waist, her head tilted against his shoulder, both smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. The sound of a key turning in the lock snapped me out of my daze. My heart slammed against my ribs as I spun around, searching for a place to hide. But it was too late. The door opened, and there she was, Claire, standing in the doorway, her face morphing from shock to sheer panic as our eyes met. Behind her, the man from the photo stood frozen, his expression a mix of confusion and guilt. The silence was deafening. What are you doing here?" Claire stammered, stepping inside and quickly closing the door behind her, as if that would erase the scene unfolding. I didn't answer. My gaze shifted between her and the stranger who now looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. The weight of betrayal settled over me like a storm cloud, but I didn't explode, not yet. Instead, I pulled out the keys from my pocket and held up the fob. "Forgot something?" Her face went pale. For a second, Claire just stood there, staring at the key fob dangling from my hand as if it held the power to erase everything. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something but couldn't decide what. The man behind her, mid-30s, polished, with the kind of confidence that reeked of entitlement, took a cautious step back, as if distancing himself would somehow save him from the fallout. "Mike, this isn't," she began, her voice trembling. "Isn't what, Claire?" I cut her off, my voice low and sharp. I wasn't shouting yet. I wasn't sure if I was trying to stay calm or if I was too stunned to feel the full weight of my anger. "Isn't what it looks like? Because, from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the man, her work buddy I assumed, and gave him a look. Not one of fear or shock, but one of pleading, like they were co-conspirators caught in the act. "I think you should leave," she said to him, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, glancing between us like he was weighing his options. "Claire, now," she snapped, her tone suddenly steely. It was a voice I hadn't heard before. Cold, commanding, like she was used to being obeyed. Without another word, The man grabbed his jacket from the chair and slipped out the door, avoiding my glare as though looking at me might burn him. The second the door clicked shut, the dam broke. "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me, Claire?" "Calm down," she shot back, straightening her posture like she was preparing for battle. "You don't know what you're talking about." I let out a bitter laugh, holding up my phone. "Oh, don't I? I saw the messages. Last night was amazing. Same time tomorrow. Who the hell sends that to their coworker? Claire? Is this your new office policy?" She flinched but quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. "You were snooping through my stuff? Unbelievable, Mike. You're so paranoid." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Paranoid? That's what you're going with right now." I gestured to the photo on the table. "I'm standing in his apartment, Claire. There's a picture of you two cuddled up like a happy little couple. And you're seriously going to act like I'm the one in the wrong." She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cold but shaky. "It's not as simple as you think." "Then explain it to me," I shouted, the anger finally boiling over. "Make me understand why the woman I married, the woman I trusted, thought it was okay to sneak around with some guy behind my back." Her eyes flashed with defiance, but underneath it, I saw something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But then she did what she always did when things got hard. She deflected. "You've been so distant, Mike," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "Always working, always distracted. Do you even realize how lonely I've been? How unappreciated I've felt?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So this is my fault now? Are you seriously trying to blame me for this?" "I'm just saying," she trailed off, looking away. Her voice softened, taking on a manipulative edge. "Things haven't been good between us for a long time. You can't deny that." My hands clenched into fists at my sides, not out of a desire to hurt but out of sheer frustration. I couldn't believe this was the same woman I'd shared my life with, the same woman who had once looked at me like I was her entire world. "Don't you dare try to rewrite history," I said through gritted teeth. "We've had problems, sure, but that doesn't give you a free pass to do this, to betray me." She rolled her eyes, and the sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. "You're so dramatic," she muttered, as if I was overreacting to the destruction of our marriage. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my anger. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You're going to tell me everything. No more lies, no more excuses. And then you're going to pack your things and leave." Her eyes widened. "Leave? Mike, be reasonable. We can work through this." "Work through this?" I interrupted, laughing bitterly. "You think I'm just going to sweep this under the rug? Forget that I walked into your lover's apartment and found you here like it was your second home." For the first time, I saw a crack in her confidence. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and her gaze faltered. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the vulnerability vanished, replaced by the icy indifference that had become her default lately. "You're being ridiculous," she said, grabbing her bag. "I'll give you some time to cool off. We'll talk later." Before I could respond, she brushed past me and walked out the door, leaving me standing there in the wreckage of what used to be my life. And just like that, the Claire I thought I knew was gone. Or maybe she'd never really been there at all. The silence after she left was deafening. I stood there, surrounded by a stranger's apartment that now felt like ground zero for everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My chest was tight, my head spun. I wanted to scream, punch something, cry. Anything to make the suffocating pressure inside me release. But I couldn't move. Then my gaze fell back to the coffee table. The framed photo of Claire and him. Slowly, deliberately, I picked it up. My hand trembled as I stared at the image. Her smile, bright, genuine, was the same smile she used to reserve for me. Now it felt like a lie. My hand clenched around the frame until I heard the glass crack. The sound snapped me out of my stupor, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I needed answers. If Claire wasn't going to give them to me, maybe her lover would. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was still open to the messages I'd seen earlier. There was his number sitting there like a loaded gun. I didn't hesitate. My thumb hovered for half a second before I pressed call. The line rang once, twice, then he answered. Hello? His voice was cautious, as though he already knew this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Get ready? I said, my voice cold and steady despite the storm raging inside me. I'm coming for you. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. Mike? He asked, as if he wasn't sure. That's right, I said, my grip tightening around the phone. Mike, Claire's husband. You remember me, don't you? Listen, man, he started, his tone shifting to something almost pleading. I think we should talk about this calmly. There's no need to. To what? I snapped, cutting him off. To be angry? To call you out for sneaking around with my wife behind my back? You've got some nerve. Mike, please, it's not what you think, he said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. Claire told me. She said things between you two were over. She told me you were separated. For a moment, his words threw me off balance. Separated? The lie was so outrageous I almost laughed. But it also confirmed something important. Claire had been feeding him a story. Separated. I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Let me make one thing crystal clear. Claire and I were very much together. No breaks, no separation, no excuses. Whatever she told you, she lied. He stammered, struggling to respond. I didn't know. I swear, if I'd known. You didn't know. I interrupted, my voice rising. You didn't think to ask a few questions before jumping into bed with another man's wife? What kind of person does that? The silence on the other end was deafening. I could feel his discomfort, his guilt, or maybe just his panic at being caught. Look, he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost apologetic. I didn't mean for this to happen. Claire came to me. She told me she needed someone, that she wasn't happy. I didn't think. That much is obvious, I said sharply. My fury was afire now, consuming every shred of restraint I had left. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about the vows she made. You didn't think about anything but yourself. He sighed heavily, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hang up. But then he spoke again, his tone almost resigned. Look, if you want to meet, talk this out, whatever, I'll do it, he said. But this is between you and Claire. I'm sorry, okay? Sorry doesn't fix this, I said coldly. You'd better hope I don't see you again. And then I hung up. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding. The call hadn't given me the satisfaction I'd hoped for. He was just another piece of the puzzle. A willing participant, sure, but Claire was the architect of this disaster. I shoved my phone back into my pocket and left the apartment without looking back. As I stepped out onto the street, the weight of everything pressed down on me again. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of it all. It was too much, but I wasn't done. Claire thought she could walk out and avoid this. She thought she could run from the mess she'd made. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. It was time to go home. Time to face her again and drag the truth out of her. No matter how ugly it was. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When I got home, the house felt different. Not in the physical sense. The furniture was still in its usual places. The air still carried the faint scent of her favorite vanilla candles. But the energy was off. It was hollow, lifeless. A house that had stopped being a home. Claire was already there, sitting at the dining table with her arms crossed. She'd changed out of her work clothes into sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, like she was preparing to play the role of the wronged party. Her hair was tied back, and her expression was a calculated mix of irritation and feigned innocence. "Did you cool off?" she asked, her tone clipped but calm, like she was addressing a child throwing a tantrum. I stared at her, the weight of everything crashing back down. For a second, I didn't speak. I just stood there, taking in the woman who had somehow managed to destroy years of trust in a matter of days. "No," I said finally, my voice steady but icy. "I didn't cool off. I talked to him, Claire. Your little work buddy." Her face faltered just for a second, but she recovered quickly, leaning back in her chair. "You called him? Wow, that's mature. You lied to him." I shot back, stepping closer. "Told him we were separated." You've been spinning stories to make yourself look like the victim, haven't you? She rolled her eyes, her confidence snapping back into place. Mike, I don't owe you an explanation for every little thing I do. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. Don't act like you're some perfect husband. Her words were like gasoline on a fire. Checked out, I repeated, my voice rising. You mean because I work long hours? Because I've been doing everything I can to keep this house running while you've been sneaking off to play house with some stranger? Stranger? She said with a scoff, standing up now. Her voice was sharp, defensive. You don't know anything about him or about what I've been dealing with. Then tell me, I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. Tell me what I missed, Claire. Tell me how I became the bad guy in your story while you were out there breaking every promise we made to each other. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time the mask slipped. Beneath the indifference and deflection was something raw and ugly, resentment. You want the truth? She spat, her voice cutting. Fine. I was bored, Mike. I was bored of coming home to someone who's more interested in their phone than their wife. I was tired of feeling invisible while you played the martyr with your long hours and your sacrifices. So, yeah, I found someone who actually made me feel alive for once. Her words hit like a physical blow, but I refused to flinch. You're blaming boredom? I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. You think that justifies throwing away everything we've built? It's not just boredom, she snapped, throwing her hands up. It's you, Mike. You're so controlling, so judgmental. Every time I tried to talk to you about how I was feeling, you'd either dismiss it or twist it around to make me feel like the problem. That's not true, and you know it, I said, shaking my head. Every time we had an issue, I was the one trying to fix it. You're the one who shut me out. You're the one who decided the solution was to run to someone else instead of facing your problems like an adult. She laughed bitterly, pacing now. Right? Because you're so perfect. You've never made me feel like I wasn't enough, right? You've never ignored me or made me feel like I was just some piece of furniture in your precious little life. You don't get to twist this around, I said, stepping in her path. You don't get to make me the villain because you couldn't handle being honest. You had choices, Claire. You could have talked to me. You could have walked away if you were that unhappy. But you chose this. You chose to lie, to cheat, to humiliate me. And now you want to act like it's my fault. Her jaw clenched, her eyes flashing with fury. You don't understand, Mike. You never have. Then help me understand, I challenged, my voice quieter but no less firm. Help me understand why the woman I loved, the woman I fought for, decided I wasn't worth the truth. For a moment, she said nothing. The room was heavy with unspoken words, the kind that could never be taken back. Then, finally, she looked at me, her expression hard and cold. Maybe you weren't, she said simply. The words cut deeper than anything else she'd said. I felt the air leave my lungs, the finality of her statement settling like a stone in my chest. Wow, I said softly, shaking my head. There it is. The truth. Yeah, she said, crossing her arms again. There it is. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything hanging between us like a broken bridge. Then I turned away, heading for the stairs. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice sharp with frustration. To pack your things, I said without looking back. You're leaving tonight. Her silence followed me up the stairs, but I didn't care. For the first time in days, my mind felt clear. This wasn't salvageable. Whatever love we'd had, whatever foundation we'd built, was gone. She'd made sure of that. Now it was time to let her face the consequences. Packing Claire's things felt like dismantling a crime scene. Each item, her clothes, her books, the little trinkets she'd insisted on buying during our vacations, was a reminder of the life we'd built together. A life she'd casually burned to the ground. I didn't do it gently. I grabbed armfuls of her clothes and threw them into suitcases without caring if they wrinkled. Her jewelry box clattered to the bottom of a bag, its contents a chaotic tangle of silver and gold. I didn't care. None of it mattered anymore. She followed me upstairs eventually, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching me with a mix of defiance and irritation. This is ridiculous, Mike, she said, her voice clipped. You're being dramatic. We need to talk about this like adults. I stopped mid-pack, turning to face her. Talk about what? How you lied to me. How you brought some guy into our lives and made him a second home without me knowing. There's nothing left to talk about, Claire. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. She scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. You're so self-righteous. Like you're completely innocent in all of this. Like you didn't push me to this point. Stop it, I said sharply, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. Stop trying to blame me for what you did. Own it, Claire. For once in your life, just own it. Her expression flickered. Annoyance, guilt, something I couldn't quite place. But she recovered quickly, shaking her head. Fine. You want me to own it? I'll own it. Yeah, I cheated. I needed something you couldn't give me. But you can't stand here and act like you've been the perfect husband. You don't even see me anymore, Mike. I stopped being your wife a long time ago. I've just been your roommate. I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of her words. A roommate, I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. Is that what you've been telling yourself? That I didn't love you? That I didn't try? God. Claire, you're so desperate to justify what you did that you're rewriting history. She rolled her eyes, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You always do this. Twist everything around to make yourself look like the victim. You're not the only one who's hurting here, Mike. That was it. That was the breaking point. No, I said, stepping closer. My voice steady but full of venom. You don't get to play the victim. You don't get to act like this is some mutual failure. You lied to me. You humiliated me. You dragged me through hell while pretending everything was fine. You chose this, Claire. You chose him. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. For a moment we stood there, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Are you done? She asked finally, her voice cold and detached. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Yeah, Claire, I'm done. I'm done with the lies, the excuses, the manipulations. You can spin your little sob story to whoever you want. But I'm done listening. I zipped up the last suitcase and shoved it toward the door. There. Take your things and go. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me with a look I couldn't quite place. Anger? Resentment? Regret? I didn't care anymore. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost subdued. You're going to regret this, Mike. I barked out a laugh, shaking my head. No, Claire. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner. That seemed to hit a nerve. Her mask slipped for a moment, and I saw something raw beneath it. Hurt, maybe, or anger at losing control of the situation. But she recovered quickly, grabbing the suitcase and straightening her posture. Fine, she said, her voice cold and sharp. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you paint me as the villain here. You'll see, Mike. You'll see how much of this is on you. She turned on her heel and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, the echo of her words lingering in the air. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, no, that was still a long way off. But peace, because now it was over, or so I thought. I sat in the quiet of the house, the emptiness around me feeling heavier than ever. Claire was gone. Her things packed and dragged out the door in a whirlwind of anger and accusations. I should have felt relieved, maybe even victorious. Instead, I felt raw, like a wound ripped open before it could begin to heal. But it wasn't over. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Claire wasn't the type to walk away quietly. The confirmation came 2 hours later when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, half expecting some desperate apology or venomous text from Claire. Instead, it was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello. You think you're so clever, don't you? The voice was sharp, male, and laced with venom. I recognized it immediately. It was him. Ah, the homewrecker, I said, leaning back in my chair. My voice was calm, but my pulse quickened. What do you want? What I want, he said, his tone icy, is for you to stop dragging Claire through this mess. You've done enough damage. I laughed bitterly. I've done the damage? That's rich. Coming from the guy who couldn't keep his hands off another man's wife. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less threatening. You don't know the whole story, Mike. You think you do, but you don't. Oh, I'm sure you've got plenty of justifications, I said. But the bottom line is you're both liars. That's all I need to know. You really don't get it? He said, a mocking edge creeping into his voice. You think this is about love? About some affair? You're blind. Claire deserves better than you. Someone who actually listens. Someone who cares. And I'm not going anywhere, so you'd better get used to it. That last line hit like a punch. He wasn't just Claire's lover. He saw himself as her future. Do you even hear yourself? I said, my voice sharp. You're delusional. You think she's going to build a life with you after all this? You're nothing but a distraction. A temporary fix for her boredom. When she's done with you, she'll toss you aside just like she did me. Silence hung on the line for a moment before he spoke again. His voice quieter but no less venomous. You don't know Claire like I do. And if you keep pushing her, you're going to regret it. I felt my temper spike, but I forced myself to stay calm. Is that a threat? It's a warning, he said, and then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my thoughts racing. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just posturing. A desperate attempt to rattle me. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Something about his tone, his confidence, made me uneasy. I decided to distract myself by cleaning up the mess Claire had left behind. As I moved through the house, picking up the remnants of our life together, I spotted her laptop sitting on the kitchen counter. She'd forgotten it in her rush to leave. My first instinct was to ignore it. I'd already seen enough messages, enough lies. But the longer I stared at it, the more I felt that familiar pull. If there was more to the story, more she was hiding, I needed to know. I opened the laptop and navigated to her email. She hadn't logged out. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. There were emails to him, hundreds of them. Some were mundane, others intimate, but one thread stood out. It was about money. Claire had been sending him large amounts, thousands of dollars at a time. The subject lines were vague. For the bills. Just in case. Take care of it. But then I saw an attachment in one of the messages, and my blood ran cold. It was a lease agreement for the apartment on Elm Street. She wasn't just visiting him there. She was paying for it. And that wasn't all. There were emails to someone else, a lawyer. The messages were recent, and the tone was professional but calculating. Claire had been preparing for this. She wasn't caught off guard by today's events. She'd been planning to leave me for months, setting up her exit strategy while pretending everything was fine. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. The affair wasn't some spontaneous act of passion. It was calculated, methodical, part of a larger plan to cut me out of her life while keeping everything she wanted for herself. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a heist. And now, knowing what I knew, I realized something else. Claire wasn't done. She was going to come back, not to fix things, but to finish what she'd started. And if I wasn't careful, I'd lose more than just my marriage. I closed the laptop, my jaw tightening as a new resolve settled over me. If she thought she was going to destroy me, she had another thing coming. The house was eerily silent as I sat there, staring at Claire's laptop, the full weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. I'd been blind to how deep her manipulation ran, how carefully she'd orchestrated everything. The affair wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a calculated move in a long game. And I wasn't about to let her win. I needed to think. No, I needed to act. If she was willing to lie, cheat, and drain our finances to build her new life, then I had to protect myself. She thought she had the upper hand, but she didn't know what I'd just discovered. I took photos of every email, every transaction, every document on her laptop. Screenshots of her conversations, copies of the lease agreement, anything that tied her to her lover and their plans. When I was done, I transferred it all to a secure drive. Then I made another discovery. A shared bank account she hadn't told me about. The balance wasn't much, just a few $1,000s. But the withdrawals lined up with the payments she'd been making for the apartment. She'd been siphoning money from our joint account to fund her secret life. One small transfer at a time so I wouldn't notice. That was the last straw. I called my lawyer. It was late, but I didn't care. I explained everything, the affair, the money, the emails. By the time I hung up, I had a plan. I wasn't going to confront Claire again. Words were useless with her now. Instead, I'd let the truth speak for itself. The next morning, Claire came back. I heard her car pull into the driveway, the door slam shut. She didn't knock or hesitate. She walked right in like she still owned the place. "Mike!" she called, her voice sharp and impatient. "We need to talk." I was sitting in the living room, waiting, calm, ready. She marched in, her expression a mix of irritation and determination. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the open laptop on the coffee table. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, gesturing to it. "Evidence," I said simply. Her brow furrowed, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. "Evidence of what?" "Of your lies," I said, standing up. "Your affair. Your plans to leave me. The money you've been stealing. Should I keep going? Or is that enough for now?" Her mouth opened, then closed, like she was struggling to find the right words. "You're overreacting," she said finally, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. I stepped closer, keeping my tone measured. "I'm overreacting? Claire, I have emails, bank records, lease agreements. You've been planning this for months. So no, I don't think I'm overreacting." Her face paled, but she quickly switched tactics, her voice softening. "Mike, listen, I know this looks bad, but I was going to tell you. I just needed to find the right time." I laughed bitterly. "The right time? What, after you drained our accounts and moved in with him? After you destroyed everything we built together?" She took a step back, her mask slipping again. "You don't understand." "No, Claire," I said, cutting her off. "You don't understand. You think you can walk in here, lie to my face, and come out on top? Not this time. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and you're not getting a dime more than you're legally entitled to. Not the house, not my savings, nothing." Her eyes narrowed, and the sweetness in her voice evaporated. "You think you can screw me over like that? You think I'll let you?" I stepped closer, meeting her glare with one of my own. "Try me." The silence between us was electric, charged with years of unresolved tension and the weight of every betrayal. Finally, she turned away, grabbing her bag from the couch. "You'll regret this, Mike," she said over her shoulder, her voice dripping with venom. "Maybe," I said, watching her walk to the door. "But not as much as you will." She slammed the door on her way out, leaving me alone again. But this time I wasn't the one feeling defeated. I had the truth, the evidence, and a plan. She thought she was untouchable, but she was wrong. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about taking back control. And I wasn't going to stop until I did. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, meetings with my lawyer, and carefully orchestrated moves to protect myself from the fallout Claire was trying to create. Every action she had taken, the lies, the deceit, the financial siphoning, was now part of a strategy. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had the upper hand. Claire's fury came quickly, as I expected. First, it was emails. Long-winded diatribes about how I was destroying her life, how I was being petty and vindictive. Then came the calls. Angry voicemails alternating between threats and fake pleas for reconciliation. I didn't respond to any of them, but Claire wasn't the type to sit back and let things unfold quietly. The real blow came when I arrived home one evening to find a police officer waiting on my porch. "Michael Benson?" he asked, clipboard in hand. "Yes," I said cautiously, stepping forward. "I'm here to serve you," he said, handing me a stack of papers. My stomach dropped as I realized what they were. A restraining order. "Are you kidding me?" I muttered, flipping through the pages. "She's claiming harassment," the officer explained. "Says you've been threatening her and her boyfriend." The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. She was trying to flip the narrative, paint me as the aggressor while she played the victim. "Understood," I said tightly, not wanting to give the officer any reason to linger. "Thanks for letting me know." He gave me a polite nod and left, but the damage was done. I felt the anger bubbling up again, threatening to overwhelm me. This wasn't just a fight anymore, it was war. The next day, I met with my lawyer to counter her move. We filed a motion to contest the restraining order, armed with the mountain of evidence I'd collected. Screenshots of her messages, records of the money she'd taken, and the lease agreement for the apartment were all laid out like pieces on a chessboard. And then I played my trump card. I'd managed to dig deeper into the financials tied to the shared account Claire had been using. What I found wasn't just incriminating, it was explosive. She hadn't just been paying for her boyfriend's apartment. She'd been covering his debts. Credit card bills, car payments, even a private loan. It was all there, documented and undeniable. Armed with this information, we escalated the case. By the end of the week, Claire was hit with a countersuit for financial misconduct, a formal complaint regarding the false allegations, and a divorce filing that demanded every penny she'd funneled out of our accounts be returned. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally came when Claire called me directly, ignoring her own restraining order to unleash a tirade. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "Dragging lawyers into this? Making me out to be the villain? You don't even know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said calmly, relishing the cracks forming in her composure. "I'm exposing the truth. You thought you could cheat, lie, and steal without consequences? You thought you could paint me as the bad guy while you played the victim? Guess what, Claire? You've run out of moves." Her silence on the other end was deafening. Then she spoke, her voice quieter but no less venomous. "You'll regret this, Mike. I'll make sure of it." "Go ahead," I said, my voice hard. "But remember this, you started this war. I'm just finishing it." I hung up before she could respond, a sense of finality settling over me. The fallout was swift. Claire's boyfriend disappeared from the picture almost immediately. Whether he ran because of the financial scrutiny or because he realized she was dragging him into a losing battle, I didn't know. Claire herself didn't fare much better. The financial misconduct was enough to push the court in my favor. By the time the divorce was finalized, I kept the house, my savings, and a significant portion of what she tried to take. In the end, Claire had nothing but her excuses. I sat in the empty house one evening, the dust finally settling after weeks of chaos. It was quiet, but not in the hollow way it had been after Claire left. This quiet felt peaceful. I wasn't naive enough to think the pain of her betrayal would disappear overnight. Trust wasn't something you rebuilt easily, not even with yourself. But I'd survived. And in surviving, I'd reclaimed a part of myself she'd tried to take. For anyone who might find themselves in my position, here's my advice. Don't let anger blind you, but don't let betrayal break you either. Gather the truth, protect yourself, and fight for what you deserve. Because in the end, the truth always wins.